and hopefully compelling. Mark Levin, Director of the Center for Effective Justice at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, testifying for the bill. We know that there are about almost 9,000 inmates in solitary confinement or administrative segregation, which is separate from the couple thousand that are in safekeeping, which is just to protect them. And you actually have police officers, people that may be vulnerable to other inmates in safekeeping. But this bill concerns those almost 9,000 in administrative segregation, principally because they've been identified as a gang member, or because of disciplinaries in prison. But most of them, it's because they're suspected to be a gang member. And so they may or may not have committed a violent offense, but they're suspected to be a gang member, so that's why they're put in there. It is, as been noted, about 23 hours of no stimulation.
Some of that is to protect them from other gangs that may be there in the prison.
Right, and there may be other techniques that could be used. You could have, make sure that you don't have two rival gangs in the same cell. There may be other techniques. I mean, that's part of what the study. I'm not an expert on correctional management techniques, but I think there are techniques. In Mississippi, Haley Barbour cut the supermax, which is basically solitary confinement, by 80%, and they did not have any disruptions. In Michigan, they closed one whole prison by consolidating the use of solitary confinement. By consolidating their prisons, they were able to close a unit, and they saved a lot of money through that, and they didn't have prison riots. Now, one of the concerns that was mentioned before, which I think is the public safety concern, is those that we're directly releasing from this 23-hour solitary confinement to the public. So we're saying they're too dangerous to be in the general population of our prison, but they're not too dangerous to be released to live next to you and me.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Levin, are you aware of any statistics that demonstrate that someone is released on parole or directly into the public immediately after release from ADSEG?
Yes, I've got those statistics from TDCJ last year. For 2008, there were 1,366 people released directly from solitary confinement to the public, and 863 were flat discharges and 503 were on parole. And I have a study that was done a couple of years ago.
So they actually paroled 500 and some people from ADSEG?
That's correct. Yep. And so, I have a study here from Washington State where they did analysis of the inmates released from their supermax, which is solitary confinement. This was by professors at the University of Washington, versus those released from regular, custody. And they adjusted for 8 factors that are predictive of recidivism and for mental illness. So they were comparing apples and apples. And so here's the finding. 47% committed a new felony that were released directly without being stepped down to lower custody level, released directly from ADSEG, and versus 40% for the control group. So 7% higher new felony recidivism. And then it was worse among new offenses against the person, 36% by those released from solitary, again after adjusting for all the factors, versus 24% in the control group. So we had a lot more violent recidivism among those that were released directly from solitary confinement in this Washington State study. So that is a concern, and one of the things the study is going to look at is the process for getting out of solitary confinement. And the sole way to get out now is the GRAD program, the Gang Renunciation Program, and it's an excellent program, but there's a waiting list of a number of months to get in, and that is a waiting list of people that have been thoroughly screened for a number of months to make sure they're sincere about wanting to renounce the gang. So that program has a waiting list. It's a very long program. I think it's about 6 or 12 months to complete the GRAD program. And one of the things the study could look at is, could we create a little shorter program that would still have the same success rate? And by the way, GRAD's been very successful. According to TCJ, nobody who's gone through GRAD has gone back into the gang. But it's just that it's there's a waiting list to get into it. And by and large, once you're in solitary, it's pretty hard to get out. And so I think we can look at how we can, particularly for those who are approaching their release, create an avenue to get out of this if you behave well.
Ms. Marquez.
Do you have an answer to Representative Parker's question, which I thought was a good one? What type of offenses do they use solitary confinement for? Do you have any of that information available?
Well, the classification level isn't necessarily correlated with the offense level. So because of your gang membership, for example, or suspected gang membership, you may, even though you've never committed a violent offense, you may be in solitary confinement. I don't have the breakdown, maybe TDCJ does, of what offenses these people have committed, but it really isn't necessarily correlated with the offense level. But I would concede, I'm sure some of them committed some very bad offenses, no doubt.
Members, any other questions for Mr. Levin?
Sure.
Parker.
That population of 500 that you mentioned that were released, directly from solitary effectively to the population at large. I guess this is probably a discussion for, a question for our agencies, but do we track that? Do you track that at TVPF in terms of how those individuals are doing? Maybe some more depth of detail on that?
I think the LBB might be able to figure that out, but they did some follow-up, but the number was 1,366 released straight from solitary in 2008. 863 were flat discharges. They served every day of their sentence. 503 parole. So you have about over 1,300 people. So yeah, I mean, we have the Washington State study I mentioned, but we don't have any data specific to Texas because I don't think it's been reported or whether, I don't know whether we could find it, but that's a great question to ask of whether that recidivism rate, after you adjust it for the other factors like the Washington State study, whether that's higher.
Right.
Members, any other questions for it?
I might just make a comment, Mark, but if you wouldn't mind, if Representative Marquez is open to it, to having some discussion about some of your recommendations that, might strengthen the study, that might be of real interest, certainly to me. I'm sure to the...
Yeah, I think the bill includes, or at least nothing I said would be outside of the scope of the bill, what could be studied. Obviously, I think you tried to be flexible, so we're not, and it didn't have a fiscal note, which is good. But I really think it's something we need to have the best experts. I think some of them may be here in the country
Ms.
to help
Marquez
us
has another question.
look at what Mississippi did and how we can move forward.
And again, this is a work in progress, so, I just want to be respectful of the two representatives that we have here waiting in our committee, because this is a work in progress, so.
In other words, thank you, Mark.
Yep, thank you. We like the bill. Thank you. Good night.